Dobre-
So, dear afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have a truly wonderful and interesting topic: innovation and investment in infrastructure of the future. So, everyone who really cares about this and is interested in it, please take your seats. Quite a complicated topic, anyway. It's always relevant still in our constantly changing world, so with some new variables, new factors. Every year we have some news, some surprises, how it all actually affects the infrastructure and innovations. What doesn't change in our lives? The only trend, the globalization. It's a constant trend. 50 years ago, if we take this period in cities, on our planet we had only 1/3 of population, of global population living, so only 1/3 of urban residents. By 2050, what we forecast to have, 2/3 of the world's population will move to cities. 1.5 million of people every week come to live in cities. The life's changing drastically. Industrial centers play a key role in economics, in global economics. So is the infrastructure, urban infrastructure, ready for this to happen, for this shift? Just like me, everyone, today, we had this traffic while coming to Parkaway Center, and every day we actually face some elements of imperfectly functioning infrastructure. So what will happen in the nearest future? What will be there? What innovations, what investments? What will ensure the convenience for us in this globalization trend, in this rapidly changing world? In this panel today, we have wonderful speakers, truly prominent speakers dealing with the infrastructure problems for so many years, and we'll have a conversation with them on what's waiting for us. So, we have the Laurent Germain, CEO of Egis Group. Yeah, thank you. Pause. You may take any seat. So we have with us, so he presents the company. He presents the company working with infrastructure projects in Ukraine and in Europe. This is one of the most popular companies, actually, which deals with management of infrastructure projects. And we'll have questions to him, of course. So, Jean-Erik Zagon, head of Ukraine's office of European Investment Bank. Jean-Erik will come to us soon. I'll tell about him a little bit. So, European Investment Bank is one of the biggest partners of our state in infrastructure projects implementation. And within the last years, the amount of investments by the European Investment Bank in Ukrainian economy is 7.5 billion. Invested. We can say that this is truly a partner of huge significance. Good afternoon. And by the way, one of the projects I personally am familiarized with of EIB, the second flying zone of Boryspil Airport, its reconstruction. So I'm so grateful to EIB for their participation and their contribution in the development of Ukrainian airspace industry. So please do continue implementing this project, please. Inessa Kerdivara. Inessa is the Deputy General Director of a company called Tatra Yug. This company is based at Yuzhmash in Dnipro, and she has quite a masculine job. So what they do, so carriages for trams, and that's what they manufacture. So it's really interesting to talk to you. What are your plans and how you see the future of the company? Yuri Vaskov. With Yuri, we've known each other for quite a long time. I've known Yuri and for so many years. He works with he deals with the sea transport issues, so he's the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine, and one of the areas he's responsible for is, by the way, it's the concession of the state enterprises and PPP, public-private partnerships. So it really is going to be interesting. Dirk Slodzinski. So we have Dirk Slodzinski, Director on Business Consulting, Deutsche Bahn Engineering and Consulting Company. So Deutsche Bahn, we do not need to introduce them. A huge concern in his consulting unit. I guess they have already gone beyond the concern itself, and they provide valuable consultations on many issues related to railway industry all around the world. Thank you for coming to Ukraine finally, and we do hope that your expertise, that your competence of the representative of the Deutsche Bahn, that we definitely will be able to use it and for us to solve these railway problems. And right now, why actually I'm moderating this panel? For the last 10 years, I've been dealing with the transport issues. I was responsible for Ukrzaliznytsia transport unit. Now I am the president of Ukraine International Airlines, so I know a lot about the transport problems. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So I have a first question to Jean-Erik. So EIB, we can see what you are doing. We can see your projects with the state investments in the state infrastructure. This is something that is more visible. When I was preparing to the panel, I read your interview where you actually advised the investors in Ukraine, where you advised them to invest in food industry, IT, and green economy. How does this correlate with the activities of EIB in Ukraine? Private investors, do they have real chances with those industries that you mentioned? Is it possible for them to participate in the development of Ukraine's current economy?
I remember that interview. Take that off. That interview, the question was, what would you do with your own money as an investor? So the question was not for EIB, it was for me. And I obviously say that I think it would be a good idea to invest in the food industry, IT, and also the conversion to the green economy. The reason I think for that is that obviously for a private investor, you're looking for higher return. And I think the high potential in this country, you have a lot of high potential in this free sector. Now, for EIB, it's obviously different. EIB is the EU bank. So what we have to do is to support the policy and the priorities of the EU to develop Ukraine. Now, we can take the three one I mentioned before. They're absolutely fine. If we take the food industry, if we take IT and conversion to green industry, you cannot do that without having a very, very good infrastructure in place. And that is very much the role of EIB, to support Ukraine to have this very good infrastructure. I mean, food industry, you need to have transport. Obviously, you need still to build a few roads in Ukraine. Now, EIB, EU, we would prefer that you transport things by internal waterland, by train and so on. So EIB is there to support, to have this infrastructure in place on the transport, but yes, we're going to favor the green economy, the green transport, which we think is better. Ukraine, you need to have still development in energy infrastructure. There need to be a conversion from the coal industry towards more renewable energy. And there again, EIB will support you. So that is thing you really need to have, these three sectors coming up that I just mentioned. You can mention the IT. You can say, well, IT people, they maybe don't need all that because they need obviously broadband, they need some energy, but it's not very, very fundamental. But if you want to have a good IT industry in the whole country, not only in Kiev, Lviv, Odessa, some of the main cities, you need to develop, and I think that is really key in Ukraine, you need to develop a lot of the municipal infrastructure. If you want to keep people in the city, the medium-sized cities, you need to have the mayor developing that. I have been discussing with mayors saying, people are leaving. I have bright people, they are leaving. They're all going to Kiev or to go to Germany or Poland. And my question would be, what have you done? Have you created schools? Have you created kindergartens? Do you have street lighting? What do you do with the waste? So there are a lot of need, if you want, on the infrastructure for municipalities to be developed. And clearly, the role of the bank is to support this kind of development. IT is not something, digitalization is one of the top priority of the EU. It's not something on top. I think also today, when you develop infrastructure, you have to develop smart infrastructure. You can do much better communications, train, inland water and so on, if you have that digitalized. If you want to have municipal infrastructure, I mean, smart cities is something that exists. So you can manage much better a city with that. So IT is not a luxury on top. IT, digitalization, has to be a part of that. And that is something I think really, really EIB would like to see developed in Ukraine. So, yes, I think there's definitely a role for the state the authorities concerning the infrastructure. It is the mission of a state or local authorities to be sure that the infrastructure is in place. You must have good infrastructure to allow business to be developed. Business developed, you can collect taxes, so that is a gain. Now, what I think is that you need to have the infrastructure developed in the municipalities on the state level. How you finance that is a political decision. It's not up to IFIs to decide how you do that. Do you want to have that on the state budget? Do you want to do concession? Do you want to do private-public partnership? That is honestly is a decision to be taken by the authorities and by the government and your parliament. But I think that what you need is to have that functioning, the mission of a state to have a functioning infrastructure. Again, how you finance it, what kind of model is more a political one. But it's definitely sure that when you have a good strategy in place on how you want to develop this infrastructure, EIB will continue to support Ukraine as we have done so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Infrastructure, well, we talk about all its components. We mean that the state has also, apart from this great construction, apart from roads, they also have to take care of railway infrastructure, airports, the general infrastructure, also the water transport. Thank you. And I'd like right now Inessa Kerdivara to tell us about her business. For me, it's not quite clear today what model did you pick in such complex business like production of trams in Ukraine as carriages. I mean, the tram carriages. Today, these are mostly purchased by the municipal enterprises, and they have quite limited budgets. Therefore, they are more prone to actually perform the major repair of the exploited ones, of the utilized ones, apart from buying new ones, new items. But there are very strict requirements to the production localization, and it's really very interesting to get more about your business model. Please do tell us. So, good afternoon. My name is Inessa Kerdivara, and I would like again to quote. You quoted Jean-Erik de Zagon. I will quote as well. I'll allow myself. So, once you mentioned that investment in infrastructure itself is definitely an indicator of faith, of certain belief that development is about to come. And what we have in Ukraine today in our panel, this is an indicator itself that infrastructure is being developed, but what to invest in for the output to be the top, the maximum, for the maximum ROI. And we have this International Union of Public Transport. They had a study or a survey launched, like, in what area should you invest? And it happens so that in public transport, investment in public transport, they give 25% more of jobs comparing to construction of roads, for example. 25% more of jobs, new jobs. And the same effect goes for investment in public transport, public transport, ecologically friendly, environmentally friendly. Because you mentioned the green politics that EIB is investing in. This is one of the priorities for Ukraine as well, to invest not in buses, but to invest in environmentally clean, green, clean municipal public transport, for us to increase the mobility of our citizens and not to inflict any damage on their health. So that's what we're doing. Within 28 years already, we produce tram carriages. It's located at Yuzhmash, the headquarters in Dnipro, and we had this model at the beginning. We worked for the internal market because we had this faith. We had this strong faith, and we do have this faith still. The internal market in Ukraine is huge. 5,000 tram carriages which are subject to replacement. And we had it in 1991 to ensure the mobility of citizens to provide high-quality services. Right now, 80% of that amount is subject to replacement. So it's about to go to waste. So the competition, you do compete with such huge monsters like PESO, with huge experience and with this access to cheap money, as they say. How you manage to compete? PESO at some moment has become a state enterprise, a state-owned company, and it made it more complicated. For example, in Romania, where we won the tender, we took the winning position. We now take part in 3 European bidding procedures, but state-owned companies, they have a little bit different portfolio, and they have another approach to negotiation, to sales, to bidding procedures. So we do compete with quality, with very high quality, because the new carriage that we buy, the way, with EIB loan, we managed to supply to KIEF. We won the tender for 20 tram carriages. In February, we signed the contract, and the first carriage was already provided. We had the great quality, not even worse with PESO, Stadler, or any other competitors. And we had a better price proposed. So something that any investor takes primarily as the key thing. So saving your money with the maximum result. And that's how we now take part in Ukrainian tenders, and we work at Ukrainian market in international. So we have a contract complete with Egypt. That was the state funding. We also supplied some carriages to Egypt. And we look for markets because public transport today is like in the Renaissance period. And there are so many cities today, as I mentioned during the conversation with Mr. Shmegal, they invest resources not the credit money, but state money, state funding. We speak about state funding to rejuvenate actually the fleet. Okay, so the localization requirement, localization in Ukraine for foreign producers, does it give you some advantages in competition, at least in Ukrainian market? Well, the requirement on localization at state level, we don't have it. In state launch tenders, what we have launched by EIB, there we have 15% of preference if there is 30% of local production, and some cities do use it. Unfortunately, we have some MIOs, we have some municipal enterprises which do ignore that standard. And maybe it's still a question to the Ministry of Infrastructures, one of the participants of the project, that this standard is not an obligatory one, let's say, and someone is sticking to the standard and trying to nationalize the economy, trying to support the Ukrainian producer, and someone ignores that. So concerning the foreign markets, for us to go to American market, for example, we need to have 75% of localization. So we practically have to transfer the production there and to produce carriages literally in the US. So you need to lobby this in Ukraine. Yes, we would like the localization to be one of the elements of supporting the Ukrainian producer, because there are so many direct contracts with the General Electric or Alstom. They declare localization as one of the promises, but as we can see, in fact, we have no such localization in place. So you can declare and sign a contract and deliver the product, but the share from each euro of the credit money doesn't go to Ukraine. So we want localization to be one of the requirements for the state bidding procedures and tenders. So, and the partner localization, do you actually see someone as a partner, or you want just to move autonomously? Like Tatra Yuk. In our production in cooperation, we have 300 Ukrainian enterprises participating. Tram carriage is constructed from millions of details, and all these accessories, all these details, we try to actually order these from Ukrainian producers. So 85% of localization, we managed to get it. And we are really proud of it, and we don't want to lose that. So that's why we try to promote this policy, protect Ukrainian manufacturer, and support the Ukrainian heavy industry and industry in general. So we do support you as well. And people in this hall do support you as well. They do support your achievements and such a serious contribution, great contribution, Ukrainians' infrastructure. And we do want you to be successful, of course. So I'd like to talk to Mr. Germain. Laurent. Egis company is famous for its innovations and innovative approaches in infrastructure area, and I do know that today you and your company you actually work on designing the concept for the transport node Kherson. You actually plan to create a space, a demo space, showing how high-quality infrastructure may function. So for the aviators, it's really important. Kherson Airport is really important, of huge importance. And it has a perfect geographical location and of huge significance that is. Please tell us, in your model, innovative model, how should the Kherson Airport look like, the perfect one, the properly functioning one, and the regional airport in Ukraine, how should it look like?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me. Also, as the chairman of the French-Ukrainian Business Council for the French CEO organization, I'm representing the 160 French companies working in Ukraine and employing more than 30,000 people. I think when we talk about the aviation sector, the comparison between France and Ukraine is relevant, because we have the same surface, we have a population that is roughly equivalent. We are all trying to attract people through tourism, through culture, and the regional airports in France, they've been very successful through the PPP model. So I guess this is the future for the regional airports, including Kherson in Ukraine, to be successful. Aviation has a strong potential in Ukraine. I mean, just a few figures. The air traffic has more than doubled between 2015 and 2019. It has been multiplied by 4 between 2006 and 2019. The traffic has been very resilient during the COVID crisis, and in the first semester of 2021, Borispol Airport has been the 16th airport in terms of traffic, which was equivalent to the traffic in Heathrow Airport in the UK. So I think the potential globally of aviation is very strong. But, of course, there is the issue and the challenge of the regional airports. So how to develop a regional airport? I mean, Egis, my company, has been quite successful in developing regional airports in France and around the world through the PPP model. I mean, we are operating 17 airports around the world with a majority of regional airports. So, I mean, the first, of course, issue is to raise the number of routes for each airport. This is very important. Having new companies, new destinations reached through I mean, the different airports. This is how we have increased by 2 million the traffic in the Abidjan airport that we are operating. This is how we have increased by 80% in Ostend, which is a regional Belgian airport. And besides, in the airports that we have been operating, we have succeeded in raising the revenues for the shops, restaurants, and develop strongly the commercial activities, and through the model of the PPP. So what makes a PPP strong and interesting, for example, for the Kherson airport? First of all, of course, there need to be the risk sharing between the public side and the private side, depending, of course, on an analysis and a shared analysis on the traffic assessment. The second aspect, of course, is the duration of the concession. The concession should be, and the PPP should be long enough, probably more than 25 or 30 years, so that the necessary investments in terms of modernization of the regional airports are made. And then it is the duty of the private partners to make sure that it can develop new routes, it can step up the revenues generated through the commercial activities. It can put in place the best-in-class innovation, having the regional airports certified, especially as sustainable development is concerned, and also, of course, manage the maintenance and assure the investments which are needed in order to have the airports modernized. I mean, in Ukraine now, I mean, we have 5 airports generating 85% of the traffic. So, of course, you have 20 airports certified in total, which means that there is a real, very important margin to improve and to develop the regional airports like the Kherson one, which basically will benefit a lot from its location and the cultural attraction that it can provide.
I know that in France, you actually were the employee of the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and you supported the government, I mean the PPP model. You supported that model. You stood for it. And now you consult as a business representative. How to separate it fairly, the investment, when you speak about airports? How to separate it between the state and private investor? How to draw the line? Because the model is effective, but the question is the fair participation, the question of the fair participation and fair segregation and fair delineation of the income, let's say. How do you see it?
I mean, first of all, the public side has to be very clear on what it wants. So, I mean, there should be a clear message in terms of duration, in terms of content of the future concessions, and the private partner, of course, shall commit to a number of investments on the duration of the business plan, based, as I said, on a common analysis of what the traffic will be. So That's why when a concession is launched, there is a period of, I would say, at least a year, so that the discussions can take place, the competition can take place, and that the public side can also find the best partner according to the analysis and the assessment that this partner can do about the investments which are needed, and of course of the revenues which can be generated through the traffic.
Thank you. Thank you. So I pass the floor to Juris. So let's continue talking about concessions, okay? And how can we prepare the objects of the Ministry of Infrastructure to concession? We spoke about airports and other objects prepared for concession. To you, as to a representative of the ministry, I'd like to ask you, so after this great construction of roads, shall we have the plan of great construction of railway routes and lines, airports, and so on? Shall we have the project for river dredging? Will everything be covered by the state? Because the roads are the priority, but if everything else. So, good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear friends. I'll start with the end, okay? So, right now, the great construction is not just a project aimed to reconstruct the roads. It has already become a more comprehensive project. We also started working with the airport infrastructure. The short-term perspective, we speak about the renovation of 10 regional airports, Dnipro, Poltava, Uzhhorod, Chernivtsi, Kherson, and others. Of course, reconstruction of railway infrastructure, huge attention is paid within recent months to support of Ukrainian railway system, reconstruction of capital infrastructure, the lines, I mean. So the fleet purchase, so the locomotives, the carriages, also grain carriages, and of course the reconstruction of seaports and internal waterways, because we have to get this fully balanced transport infrastructure. All types of infrastructure should be loaded evenly, because today we know that more than 70% of cargo transported by railway, 25% by roads, 1 or 2 by inland waterways. In all these areas, we do have specific steps developed for inland waterways. Since January 1st, we'll have a new law on inland water transport, and it deregulates the river transportation. We cancel almost all the fees for ships and vessels using the river to transport passengers and cargo. From October 1st, I want to remind you, we've enhanced the liability for violations on the roads, so we've managed to increase the fine substantially, and also violation recording. Starting from October 1st, we start using this weight in motion systems. 52 of these we have within 3 or 4 months. Within 3 or 4 months, we'll double it and then get some more and more. Gradually, then the tolling systems will be implemented after specific legislation is adopted. So, these areas will definitely promote the balanced cargo transportation with inland waterways as a priority. I just want to stress that investment activity is one of our priorities. It contains 2 components, so the public infrastructure investment from the state funds, and promoting private investments in commercial infrastructure primarily. So if you do talk about seaports or sea stations, so we take all the forms, we consider all forms of PPP, concession primarily, first and foremost as the most acceptable one for investors. And here we get the support of banking institutions, EIB, EBRD, and the leading consulting companies. Egis, by the way, is our consultant in the Berdiansk project implementation. Kherson and Nolvia paused the concession. The concession will be there, so the private companies will be responsible for them later. So in 5 more ports, the concession projects are at different stages of implementation. And in 2022, we expect to get a new competition for the concession. But together with concession, with the state, with the fund of state property, we use privatization as well as one of the ways to involve more investment flows. This year, we have first competitions on privatization on state stevedoring companies, Belgorod-Dnistrovsky port, Ust-Dunayski and Skadovsk ports. We also consider the rental as one of the PPP types where you do not need to have huge investments, but just the utilization of property as a way of management improvement. So the acting concession legislation, the applicable concession legislation is much better comparing to what we had before 2018. Again, this year we do confirm it using the Kherson and Nolvia examples. And you think these pilots are successful? Well, first of all, the legislation allows us to do it, so some difficulties we had during the transitional period, we will try to use it in future, and we'll try to present some amendments to bylaws to make it more effective in future. But if pilot projects lasted like for 3 years, new concession projects, we can implement it within 1.5 years since the beginning to the property transfer. Yes, Ukraine needs successful concession projects to give confidence to future investors, actually to participate, to promote them, and to enter Ukraine with all these projects prepared by you. But the confidence is not just in your successful work and activity, but also in success of other business projects. Won't we get this negative effect, by the way, from... We are doing such a great job at roads, you know. We are turning it into a perfect, almost perfect condition. And respectively, the cargo flow, let's just assume there will be no abuse, you know, these violations with weight. But with other types of transport, so the cargo will be taken out from water and railway to roads. Won't we have some lag in other areas? A jet lag. So, simultaneously with roads improvement, we of course work with inland waterways. This is especially relevant for the agricultural sector. And it's one of the key components, key export components. First thing, so river is free for transportation. So what we cancel the port and canal fees for transit, the bridges, the dams, and so on. Except of the weight control, we start considering the issue on putting an extra fee for cargo exceeding 12 tons. We need just to adopt specific legislation. And also railway development. So the Port Nord Station lines, railway lines, speaking about the fleet within 3 years, up to 55,000. Have carriages and grain carriages. More than 100 locomotives are from the national producers, from Ukrainian producers. I think all this will not definitely lead to reorientation to roads. So, Dirk, this is your task right now. So we have a meeting at the Prime Minister. Unfortunately, the time was changed. I have to leave you, but I'll be back. And of course, I will take all your questions if you do allow me. I apologize for, yes, unfortunately, yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay, Dirk. Railway. A state in the state, as it's quite a common saying in Ukraine, and this is definitely this is definitely a flagship of Ukrainian economy. So lost the transit significantly. So in passenger transportation, definitely it's not the business, but a social function. The state, because it's performing a social function. So. So passengers get their money from the cargo transportation, and again, we speak about low competitive advantage comparing to other cargo transporters. So passenger transport, I mean railway transport, is this business in Germany? Is that business or it's a social product? Let's call it like it. So please tell us.
First of all, let me thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and to also say be here also as Deutsche Bahn, maybe to give some context. We're here also for the Ministry for Ukrainian Railways to help with improvement of the railway system. So I'm very happy to speak about this important topic, and we chose passenger transport jointly as the area to start with. So your question is going very much towards what we are thinking about at the moment. To answer the question, it's difficult to say it's generally profitable to run passenger services. Actually, you can say there are a few exceptions where it's really only possible to run them by farebox revenue. So you need state funding in order to have a proper railway system. But let's look at it a bit in a more general perspective. When you look at the large European railway companies, overall they are profitable. They're making a good profit margin. And this is on purpose because the systems in Europe are built in such a way that these are companies that really run as a normal company, not as a social function, not as a ministry or a state entity, but rather as the railway themselves, they run as a normal business. And the system that is built around them with all these social functions, which are obviously there because the railway is a very important backbone of a country and very important for the social holding together, for people being able to travel and so on. All these social functions are built into the system that these companies are working with. So just to give you a perspective, Deutsche Bahn for 2019, let's look before COVID, because COVID, of course, made financial results a bit difficult to compare. 2019, Deutsche Bahn had a profit of 1.5 billion euros with an overall revenue of 40 billion euros, basically, which for a business like this is a healthy one. It's not a high margin business where you got a lot of return on investment, but it's enough for a company to profitably work. And also, and this is important, I think, when we're talking about investments, it's something that also attracts private investments. In this level, you have a company that is actually able to also get to the open markets, get loans and things like that, and therefore is not completely reliant on state funding. And this is how the system is built, basically. That, however, doesn't mean that state funding is not flowing into this system. When you look at how this is working, basically, you can look at two different areas, mostly. One is with railways, you have infrastructure, often in Europe separated from the operating in order to have financial transparency, in order to be able to evaluate the performance and see how much money you would like to put in there. And again, from the German example, we have two types of money that is flowing into the infrastructure in Germany. Number one is, we talked about this also, funding of new construction, basically. You get state funding, projects together with the state, or some investments of Deutsche Bahn. It always mixes it a little bit, but money is being put into the build-up of new infrastructure. That's the obvious one. Second one, also very important, is actually rebuilding of obsolete infrastructure, because we're talking about a business that has a very long-term time of living. You're going to build some tracks. Yes, they're going to hold 10, 20, 40, sometimes 80 or 100 years, but there will be a point in time where this infrastructure that you built up will also have to be replaced. You can do as much maintenance as you want, this point will come. And so also for, especially Germany, one of the things that was changed in the past years was that this was also taken into account. You cannot only invest in new building projects, but also have to make sure that the existing infrastructure is kept in a certain state that you have. And important for the system itself is a certain stability there. So when we're talking about reforming also railways in Ukraine, we of course also have to talk about long-term perspectives, because at the moment it's focused strongly on short individual activities. Yes, very helpful, but rather you also need a long-term certainty in order to be able to plan your investments as the railway, in order to make sure that there's a certain constant quality of the infrastructure that you can work with. So that's the infrastructure side. And then also, depending on which type of traffic you have and which type of connection you're talking about, you have to look into funding the passenger services themselves. When you look at long distance, especially high speed in Europe, those are self-sustainable. So France, I think, doesn't have any investments in high speed. Germany also, this is just a farebox revenue financed system that you have. This is working by itself, great. For regional traffic, it's often not the case. There are some examples, larger cities, many passengers, where you can have a regional transport system that is able to finance itself. But as soon as you go out in the regions, as soon as you have still the need for lots of connections, because the local system needs frequent connections there, but on the other hand don't have so many travelers, well, then you cannot sustain this system with just farebox revenue. And so therefore it's also very crucial to have a state financing system for this type of business that still allows you to run as a company. As I mentioned before, the EBIT should come because the DB, a railway, is running as a normal company, basically. So the system around this with the financing has to make sure that this is working. You can do it with regulative measures, you can do it with performance indicators. Some countries do it with open access. That's not necessary, but it's an option that you've got there. So either way, designing these systems properly, I think that's the big challenge there. And when you do it then yes, passenger transport is profitable for the state railway, or for the railway itself, but it still needs state funding to run by itself.
So within this time that you've been staying in Ukraine and working with Ukrzaliznytsia, have you managed to get some quick assessment, blitz assessment of the condition of passenger transport? So how effective it is that we have this so-called high-speed component. It still uses the same lines which are later used by the cargo trains, and investments and huge investment we have in the reconstruction. In long-term perspective, can we support the strategy, or we just need to pick another absolutely new strategy of passenger line construction? What will be better for Ukraine in this situation?
At the moment, we've been here for about 3 weeks, so the insights have been there, but they are not as deep to let me comment really in detail on these kinds of questions. What I can tell you for the moment, our first assessment was also clearly to see, number one, in many areas the railways are underfinanced, so we're talking about financing needs that you have there. And number two, especially in passenger transport, it's still a matter of transparency at the moment. You have these discussions about the cross-financing between cargo and passenger transport, which is partially due to the fact that everything is still within single business units. You don't really see the profitability, the revenue streams of the different parts of the business. So at the moment, the first things that we're doing is clearing up these things together with our colleagues from Ukrainian Railways to make sure that we have a clear picture on how much is there, how much needs to be there, for example, and then to also talk about the system that when more money is coming in, is flowing into, in order to make sure that this can be used efficiently and, well, this really works to the benefit of the country and to the most possible effectiveness for the use of the money.
I want to ask all of you a question. So we'll talk about the competition in passenger transportation by all possible transport means that we have in Ukraine. For example, if we take a line or a route from Kiev to Kharkiv, we have intercity, we have the night trains, we have planes, a bus connection, road connection, no river connection, the only thing, but everything else is there. So, do these have to be equal parties or equal rivals when they fight for the passengers' money? Do they need to have this parity? Because if I would pick how to get from Paris to Frankfurt, I would pick like railway, even well, not taking into account it would be more expensive comparing to flight. In Ukraine, it doesn't work that way because we have social types of transport. Do we need to get this equal competition or equal rivalry? I can say how. Dirk, maybe you can start, and then each will present one's opinion about competition. Do we need to have these as equal rivals?
Well, let me first say, in my opinion, competition is a good thing in a market. If you don't have competition, you don't have efficiency, you don't have good service, so competition by itself is a good thing. It doesn't have to be intramodal, it doesn't have to be train operators competing by themselves, but having different modes of transport with different strengths compete with each other is a good thing, in my opinion. The competition has to follow some guidelines and rules. It also is a political question sometimes. Do you want to give some of the systems a benefit because you have political goals, meaning that I have the goal to have, for example, cheap transport available. That's why I fund the trains. I have the goal to green transport, also might go to trains, but I might also have the goal to have quick transport. So travel times as well are, of course, an important factor. And giving the customer the option to choose and having a market that allows this is a healthy thing, basically. So in general, I would say it's a good thing that you have the competition, but it's always important to look at how you regulate this and what goals you would like to achieve as a country.
Yes, I fully agree. I think a fair competition is always a good thing for the customer. It's also a good thing for the business partner, for the business company, because I mean it forces the business company to improve regularly and to provide through innovation the best offer to the market. Then, of course, there will be competition between the different transport modes, simply because I mean now we have to take into account the fight against climate change. And we see already in some of the countries that I would say the rail mode of transport is favored when the time of transport is not very different from the time with the plane, simply because I mean it is assessed that the consequences on the environment are less detrimental with the rail rather than with the air. So I mean whether we like it or not, there will be some competition. Maybe not linked to the prices, but linked also to the challenge of the fight against climate change.
I mean, I think we all agree on the fact that you need to have a competition in all areas to have the most efficiency. But the only thing I would like to add, being EIB, is that the important thing is to cover hidden prices. I mean, maybe it's cheaper to have lorries on highway if you don't have to pay for the highway. So whatever you do, you must be sure that the full price of using that kind of tool of transport is reflected in the price. And then I think, yes, it's a question of competition. I think also habit change. People maybe are more conscious about the climate, and some people are going to prefer to have a train to an aircraft. But that is also a good thing, but that is more moral values. But I think from an economic point of view, it's important that all hidden costs are included in the price.
I'll take Kyiv-Dnipro. Okay, so to add the water transport, we definitely stand for competition. Because when we speak about the commitments of the state, we need to have infrastructure for competition. When it comes to roads, yes, we are doing that. We reconstruct the railway line. We plan at least to do it. So high-speed trains are about to be purchased within the next couple of years, additional batteries. And when it comes to aviation, reconstruction of 10 regional airports. For inland waterways, which is super relevant for Ukraine, using an example of European states, I'll remind you that in Ukraine we have 3 out of 10 biggest rivers in Europe, and these are almost not used today. For cargo, 10-15%, almost zero passengers, because we don't have fleet for transportation. That's the reason. For this type of transport to be competitive, we need state support, motivation of national ship construction program, we will try to get the support from other state agencies to have cheap, high-quality vessels in Ukraine, produced in Ukraine. Then we'll have certain, of course, some competition, fair competition. So competition, we do have it. We will have competition, and but we have underfinanced Ukazaliznitsa and underestimated inland waterways, and the ministry is going to deal with it. And we move in the right direction, and we do hope that railway will carry passengers at market prices, but not at established tariffs, without creating unfavorable competitive environments for the transport means. So I'd like to give a microphone to our listeners and viewers, to audience, maybe if there are questions.
Будьте добры.
So, dear colleagues, Yuri Voskresensky, I'm from Minsk, Belarus. I'm leading the Roundtable of Democratic Forces. So we talked about infrastructure, but infrastructure is primarily people. It's about people. So I have a question. Evgeny, to you, first of all. You are a moderator, but I think I can dare. So, the air connection which is cancelled between Ukraine and its ally, which always supported the territorial integrity of Ukraine, I mean Belarus. How long will it actually be there? And what losses does Ukrainian business have? Using your company as an example. Okay, this is KIEF International Economic Forum, and this is an economic panel, and I am not competent to answer any political questions when it comes to all these detours that we have today in international airlines. I mean, the avoidance of Belarusian territory. We do not have the discriminatory conditions for detouring because everyone's doing that. All our competitors do that. We do not cross your territory. Yes, we have these highly discriminatory conditions when we actually move to Kazakhstan, when we need to avoid Crimea and Black Sea. And Kazakh airlines, they go directly via Russian territory when we bring our passengers for 40 minutes longer. We do. With Belarus, there is no violation of competition in aviation. This was a common political decision. I don't know how long it takes. I'm not the person who can answer that.